urgency was around, she's getting older. Like my mom is kind of at her limit with caring for this, by then a toddler. And we were also very aware of the stages of development she was going through and the attachment issues. And she was loved and cared for and she was with family, but she didn't have one person. Like she'd lost her primary attachment and she didn't have one person who was her permanent, person. And it felt like, okay, we gotta, if I'm not going to do this, then I need to step aside so that she can be joined with the person who's going to be, the people who are going to be her parents, like sooner rather than later.
I'm Keltie McGuire, and you're listening to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Kids Are Childfree podcast. Have I told you lately how much I love hosting this podcast? I got to say, I just find so much joy in having these conversations. It allows me to be a little bit nosy. I get to ask the questions and talk about the things that we don't typically talk about. And there is never a shortage of interesting people that I have queued up to discuss this kids or child-free decision with. Today's guest is a writer who you're going to hear about in just a moment. And she slid into my inbox a few weeks ago, told me about this fantastic book that she had written called The Mother Act. And what I love so much about Heidi is that she shares and talks about the aspects of motherhood that are too often not discussed, that remain taboo. And so today we're going to be getting into all of it. We're going to talk about ambivalence. We're going to talk about losing one's identity in motherhood in the sense of feeling trapped in motherhood. I know these are things that you are already afraid of, but don't worry. There is some goodness in here. We're going to hear all about Heidi's journey into motherhood and beyond. Heidi Reimer is an essayist, novelist, writing coach, and the author of The Mother Act. Her writing interrogates the lives of women, usually those bent on breaking free of what they're given to create what they yearn for. Heidi has published in Chatelaine, The New Quarterly, Literary Mama, and the anthologies The M Word, Conversations About Motherhood, as well as Body and Soul, Stories for Skeptics and Seekers. Heidi is from Northern Ontario, Canada, and currently writes in a small town on the St. Lawrence River. Hello, Heidi.
Hello, Keltie.
Thank you for being here with me. You and I have so much to talk about that I'm going to do as little preamble as possible and just ask you to share a little bit about yourself, whatever you'd like to share in the context of this convo or otherwise.
Amazing. I'm really thrilled to be here to talk about all this juicy stuff. My name is Heidi Reimer. I'm a writer. I write novels and essays, personal essays, which have ended up to be a lot focused around motherhood and the decision to become a mother and the truth about being a mother and all of that, which was not what I thought it would be in my years before becoming a mother. I always wanted to be a writer. That's always been the goal that I was working towards since I was a kid. And I also now work as well as a creative writing coach, helping other people write novels too. So that's a huge part of my life as well.
Well, you are exceptionally talented at writing, and I have no doubts that you're an excellent creative writing coach as well. We will make sure to link to the book as well as, and it sounds like there might be other books on their way.
There are other books on their way.
Can you tell us the name of your book, actually?
Yes.
What is
so my debut novel is called The Mother Act. It is fiction. It's a mother-daughter story set on the opening night of a one-woman show. Telling the complicated story of their relationship. The actress on the stage is the mother. She made a decision refusing to abandon her art and felt she had to choose to abandon her daughter instead in order to preserve her own dreams and selfhood. And so it's equally from both of their perspectives, exploring the lead up to that choice and the fallout of that choice.
Yeah, it's an excellent book. I read it a few weeks ago. And I mean, this is the big cultural taboo, right? I wouldn't say necessarily, and I said, we're not going to talk too much about the ins and outs of the books because I want people to read it. Of course, we could tell the whole plot, but you still got to read it. It's not about regret so much as, the abandonment piece, which is, this sort of notion of what kind of mother leaves their child. This is society's narrative, right?
It's kind
so
of
we
the
get to
as
see.
you said,
Yeah.
yes, it's kind of, as you said, the taboo, maybe one of the last taboos of, you just don't do that. You can't do that. And so I wanted to explore that, but from both sides. So you have equal weight from the mother's perspective and the daughter's perspective. Why she does it and what happens as a result.
Yeah. Well, the characters in the story are pretty juicy and involved. I'll say that. And you know, I think the tension you feel while reading or even hearing about that sort of experience, or a mother who would leave their child, it's a tension that I think we have to hold in this decision. And I'm guessing in embodying motherhood, or the child-free path for that matter. Like, sometimes there is no clear resolution. And what I found with the mother character is there were parts of her I really identified with as someone who's chosen not to have children. There were parts of her I really didn't love. She's complicated. I didn't hate her. I didn't love her. She just, I'm curious for you, like, and I mean, I want to talk more, we'll talk more about the book later, but just to kind of set it up, like, this is a fiction book, but I'm curious for you how much of this feels to tell your story, or what could have been a version of your story.
Yeah, it's an imaginative experience of what I, at a certain point in early motherhood, wanted to do and knew I never would. It actually does come from my own deep struggles in early motherhood and feeling like I had lost everything. I had lost my identity. I'd lost my freedom. I lost, bodily autonomy, my time. And I felt really, I felt at a certain point, oh my God, I made a mistake. But this is a mistake you can't go back from. And I didn't want to. I didn't actually want to, because the complication there is that I loved my daughters, and I didn't want for them what I imagined the fallout of your mother walking out. I didn't want that trauma for them, but it did. It was hard in those early years, and the book actually came to me. The idea for the book came to me out of my own, like, a single moment of feeling like I want to walk out the door and, like, catch a bus back to my old life, back to the person I used to be, which is not a destination that exists anymore, right? I can't go to that place. So it was a fantasy that I never came close to acting on. But I immediately went from that to, what if this happened in a novel? Like, both, why would the mother come to that point, and then what happens to the daughter as a result? Because I never wanted it to be one-sided, and I also didn't want to make a villain. So Sadie, the mother character, she's a lot. She's pretty bold and brazen and insistent on her own point of view, to the point of probably selfishness and maybe even narcissism. Although I don't think that would be her official diagnosis. Who knows? But I never wanted to create this is the good character, this is the bad character kind of situation. It was a deep experience for me of empathy, of getting inside this character and imagining the experience that would lead her to that moment. And so I had been working earlier on a different novel that actually had a character whose mother had left early in her life, and she was raised by her grandmother. And I had been working on it before I became a mother. And that the mother in that story was not a point of view character. We were never inside her head. She was basically a villain. And then after I became a mother, I was struggling in the novel because more and more I identified with the mother. Like, she made a choice to preserve what she felt was, like, basically save her own life. And I was looking for ways to bring more nuance into the ways that I had depicted her, because before becoming mother, I'd always identified with this daughter position, right? And we explore, especially if we go to therapy, like the ways that our parents' actions and choices and ways of being have affected us.
Yeah.
And now suddenly I was on the flip side of that. I wasn't just the daughter, I was the mother doing the potential inflicting of damage, trauma, just not quite getting it right, even if it's not as extreme as that. And so I wanted to explore all of that.
Yeah. I think there's something so powerful in the sense I got is you really had a taste of, oh, I see how this could happen. I see how it wouldn't be too hard for me to potentially become this person. And I think there's certain life paths, choices, character types, if you will, out there that it's easy to feel like, how the hell could a person do that? Or like, that's so wrong, or that's so weird, or that's bad. And of course we can try and have compassion and drop our judgment. But when I'm feeling a sense of this. I see how that's possible. Whoa.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to, let's back it up, and I want to find out how you got there. But okay, I have so many questions for you. Let's go back to the beginning. The very beginning.
The very beginning.
I usually just jump right in and say okay, so did you always know you wanted to have kids? But I want to back it up more than that to say, tell me a little bit about, because you mentioned your own upbringing. And I know you shared with me, it sounds like you were part of an ultra conservative Christian family.
Yes.
So tell me about that, and specifically its interplay with the notion of motherhood, what it means to be a mom in this decision.
Yes. So when I was an impressionable young teenager, my mom and men in the community around us, other women around us, embraced this ideology around basically it was a conservative movement in white evangelical Christianity in the 80s and 90s. And that was focused a lot, first of all, traditional gender roles were very big. The God is the head, but the man is the head of everything under God, right? The man, and then the wife, and then the children, and they all submit in sort of this umbrella fashion, multiple umbrellas. And part of that was a woman's calling is to be the helper of her husband and to bear children, as many of them as God sent to her. So it wasn't just being a mother, it was being a mother to 6, 8, 10 plus children, and that being the main focus of your life. That's your calling. That's what you are meant for. And I didn't actually know. I can think of 2 examples in my childhood of women I knew who worked outside the home, maybe 3, and earned money. And they were, in every case, they were spoken of as there was something bad about that. Yeah. Look, she's so selfish. She's leaving her children all day long to go earn money, So it was really ingrained in me. And I was a big reader, reading way above my age level from very young. I read books about, meant for adult women, about the way to be a godly woman, which a giant part of it was motherhood. And it wasn't like it was foisted on me and I rebelled. I embraced it wholly from about the age of 13. And it was just this beautiful plan that God had for women and for families. It was submission and taking your place in taking your proper role in this system that would enable harmony and just it was the right way to live. And
so what happened? Where did your mind get changed? Or
yeah. So in tandem with that, I had always, since I was 8 or even younger, wanted to be a writer, which I didn't find conflict in these 2 ideas initially because you could write from home. Writing wasn't leaving the home. Women were basically not supposed to leave the home ever. Yeah. You're supposed to homeschool your 18 children and, make the meals and clean the house and support your husband who's making the money and or hopefully making the money. But I then as I got older, still a teenager, but I really began to question whether I knew what it took to raise a kid.
Yeah.
I was the oldest of 6 kids, and other families around us had even more. And it was all consuming, especially if you had that many. That is what you're doing with your life. And I just began to question how I was going to be able to write. I was already writing at that time. For a while, I thought, okay, maybe God is calling me to singleness. Maybe I'm not supposed to get married, which therefore means not having children. And I just started to really question whether I could fit myself into this mold, and began to get to know myself better as well. And question, because so much of the emphasis, so for me and my peers as teenage girls, we were supposed to be preparing for our lives as wives and mothers. And I just started to ask, like, well, what if the right man doesn't come along and you don't get married, or you choose not to, or it just doesn't happen for you? Am I just like on hold waiting for my life to begin forever? Maybe it's okay to have other goals and dreams. And so it was an ongoing sort of gradual process of unraveling, examining my beliefs. There was a lot of legalism in it as well, in terms of what you could and couldn't do and how you had to dress, and things that I just started to want to cast off some of those shackles and find more personal liberty. And I was interested in the world. I did some traveling, a very dangerous thing to do if you're trying to keep from expanding your mind too much. And so a lot of that stuff just began to fall away. It just didn't fit with the person who I found myself to actually be, and the deep goals and desires that I actually had.
I'm interested. I mean, although your upbringing and this example that you're sharing of how things were might to many feel extreme. And of course, at the same time, I've heard from listeners who, for example, were raised in purity culture, like very conservative traditions and cultures. I think there's a little element of this inside most of us. And of course, we look at the broader, societal and cultural narratives in most countries right now around there's kind of this return or idea of women assuming or taking on those more traditional roles. And of course, we know the patriarchy is as strong as it's ever been.
It sure is. Yeah.
Although I've heard it described as an extinction burst. And I'm like, maybe that's what it is. It's like the last hurrah before we see a shift.
Like that thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this idea of like someone or something has told or shown me, oftentimes it's what we're shown just by the examples we have around us of how things should be and the decisions that I should make and how I need to live. And it can be hard, first of all, for people, especially if it's more subtle, to identify where that's coming from, right? Like I'll sometimes have people say to me, well, nobody ever told me I had to have children, or what have you. And yet when I ask them to identify or think about maybe people who've chosen otherwise, most of us have few to no examples of that. And so it can be hard to figure out like what's mine versus someone else's. What do I want versus what people want for me? And I think there can also be a lot of guilt and the sense of shame of like, I'm not doing what I was made to do or told to do. And so did you grapple with any of those feelings of like, oh my God, I'm going against God's will and what's wrong with me? Is this the devil speaking to me? Or was it like, no, I'm simply going to let go of these ideas that don't serve me?
No, it was absolutely a years-long process of grappling, and kind of losing my faith bit by bit, because I let go of some of those outward forms and the do's and don'ts first, and then kind of all of it started to fall away. And I became, but around the motherhood piece, that I understood how deeply that was still ingrained in me, even though I'd consciously shed it. I began to understand how much it was still part of me once I was confronted with the decision of whether or not to become a mother. Because through most of my 20s, as I shed the belief systems and started to grow more and more into myself, traveled, wrote, developed friendships with people who I felt really fed me and had other perspectives. I met the man who had become my husband when I was 25. We got married when I was 30. I went to university late because that was not a thing that a godly Christian girl did, because that was worldly and would put bad ideas into your head. So that became really important to me at a certain point in my late 20s. I went to university, got an education. I was always writing, but still, so the piece around motherhood and what I had been conditioned to then, I had been pretty sure that I didn't want to be a mother. I considered motherhood to be the enemy of my dreams, is what I called it.
Okay.
And
that's pretty clear.
That's pretty clear. That is in the book, actually. Sadie says that at one point. And so then I did, but I had little inklings. Like, I never felt this strong biological clock situation, but I would wonder what it might be like. I would feel drawn to the idea of it, but I knew I had no rose-colored glasses about it, because I had been a part of child rearing and pregnancy and labor. Like, I was 9 when I went to my little sister's birth. I was there for it. I was around all of that stuff. And so it wasn't like it is for many women. It might not be something it's a little bit foreign. Like, you haven't been in the midst of it. Right. So it wasn't like that for me. But I did wonder about it. And then the decision had to happen. And this, I'm circling back to when I realized that all this conditioning was still in me, was once I was confronted with what in my case was a pretty urgent decision about, are you going to be a mother or not? Because, and I guess we're moving into that part of the story.
Tell us how it happened. People were like, an urgent decision. Did she become pregnant? What happened?
Yeah. So, my younger brother, who was a teenager at the time, he and his girlfriend had a baby, got pregnant and had a baby, and they raised her for the first year of her life. And then it sort of hit a breaking point where they were struggling a lot, and they kind of couldn't anymore. So that baby, who was my niece, went to live with my parents temporarily, like first just to kind of help out and give them a break. And it became a little bit longer term. My parents were in their 60s, did not want to start over raising a child. And so it was sort of this family crisis, like, what's going to happen with this baby who's part of our family, who we all love, and needs parents, because the mother in particular had by a certain point stepped out and decided, this is not for me. I can't do it. And so we were all sort of in this struggle together of trying to figure out, and I come from a big family, so there's a lot of us. Yeah. A couple of my sisters already had families of their own. My husband and I had just been married, I guess, like a year at that point, maybe a year and a half. He's from England originally. We had like a, immigration process. We just managed together. We were finally living together for the first time, like permanently, legally in the same place. And I was finishing up university. I was in my final year. And I was like, I don't know. Don't look at me. I'm not gonna be a mother. This is not in my life plan. But the thing that the thing that stopped me from just straight out saying no was that when I met her, she was 3 months old and I was meeting my little newest niece. By that point, I already had a bunch of nieces and nephews because several of my family members had gone forth and multiplied, my siblings. And so I was meeting her for the first time. I took her into my arms and I started to weep. It was this really strange, like otherworldly, like we know each other. I think like past life kind of, we must have known each other in a past life kind of thing. Like I don't even really believe in that, but why do I feel so connected to you? And it was a little bit funny, you know, my husband was like, is this the biological clock kicking in now? And I really felt that it wasn't. It was about this particular baby. So it's now, you know, a year later, and that experience had been so powerful that I couldn't just dismiss it. And so that was a big part of why I was actually considering it. And I felt, though, whether rightly or wrongly, at the time, I felt that I had to make the decision now of whether or not I would be a mother ever, because I didn't feel that I could say no to a child who was already in the world and needed a mother and then go on and make my own, you know, and the urgency was around, she's getting older. Like my mom is kind of at her limit with caring for this, by then a toddler. And we were also very aware of the stages of development she was going through and the attachment issues. And she was loved and cared for and she was with family, but she didn't have one person. Like she'd lost her primary attachment and she didn't have one person who was her permanent, you know, person. And it felt like, okay, we gotta, if I'm not going to do this, then I need to step aside so that she can be joined with the person who's going to be the people who are going to be her parents, like sooner rather than later, because, you know, time is moving on. And I had a lot of resentment about this, like feeling pressured, feeling like, why me? Like, why do I, like, it didn't feel fair. And also I just wondered, what if this is what I am, quote unquote, supposed to do? Like, why did I feel so strongly about her from the second I met her? Like, what is this? Like, it felt like this sort of metaphysical, spiritual thing. And so I decided, I was living about a 5-hour drive away from where my parents were and most of my family and this baby toddler. And so I said, I'm going to finish, like, just need to focus. I have a billion essays to write. I need to like focus on finishing this degree. And when I am done this school year, I will come up and I will just like help out, just give you a hand for a couple weeks and think about it and make the decision at that point. I read a lot of books. I really love essay collections, like anthologies of many different voices of people's personal experience, right? So I read some of those. There was one called Maybe Baby, and it was divided into yes on the fence and no, like the essays with people coming from those perspectives. And I related to all of them. I was like, I fit in all these categories. I so valued my time, my solitude, my ability to like sit and think deeply and read and write and travel and go to the theater and be with, like, it just, that to me felt like that was the life that I had and it was the life I wanted. And I knew myself well enough to know what I needed to thrive. And it was like a lot of time to myself, a lot of time to think. I need to write. If I'm not writing, if I'm not creatively fulfilled, I get a bit depressed. Like it's not good for me. And I knew exactly what it takes to, like, how much time and effort and bandwidth it takes to raise a child from day to day and year to year. And I just didn't know if I wanted to do that. And also I had this tug. Like it was really kind of tortured, you know? I would lie in bed at night. I just think, I don't want to be a mother. I don't want to change my life. I don't want to have to do this. Why do I have to do this?
Yeah. It's just you describing it. What I'm hearing is it's almost a sense of I have to do this, not necessarily from obligation, but like a sense of various forces coming together. Like it feels like I have to, but I don't want to, but I have to, but I don't want to, but part of me wants to, but most of me doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
And even though your situation is, probably, I don't want to say not relatable to anyone here. Who knows? Someone else may have someone in the family that needs parents. But it's still so relatable in the sense of so much of me is saying no, and yet a little part of me feels a tug. Yeah. And can I really close the door indefinitely on this decision? Because for you, what I'm hearing is, probably if you said no, like not to say you wouldn't have gone on and had children later, but it was sort of like this was that decision point for you.
It felt like it. Yeah. When now with perspective, I could have, I think I was putting extra pressure on myself with that. Like this is the do or die moment and you can't ever make a different decision later. I think I did myself a disservice with that pressure. Mm-hmm. And as you say, yes, there was a part of me that wanted to do it, like that, or that was deeply drawn to it and deeply drawn to this particular child. So the day came that I was, I'd finished out my school year and I was going to travel to be with my parents and help out with the baby. And the morning that I was leaving, like an hour before I left, I took a pregnancy test and it was positive.
Okay, hold on. We got to stop for a second. You said I can ask the questions. Was this an oops? Was this you had been trying? This was an oops. And so
this was an oops.
But you took a test because you thought, there's something saying like, I don't know, period hadn't come. You felt different.
It was very early. Like I think I almost, if my memory serves, I don't think my period was even late, but I had felt different in my body. I was tracking my cycle. I knew we had taken a chance a particular time. Mm-hmm. And I had a hunch. I mean, enough to take the test, right? And
so you're pregnant.
I'm pregnant.
Okay.
I'm pregnant.
And then
I'm pregnant after this tumultuous period of, inner turmoil trying to decide whether I want to be a mother. So then I immediately have to leave my husband and
Did you tell him? Was he there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he was there. We're sitting at the breakfast table with the test between us. And it was a very faint line. We're like, is that a line?
Is it expired? Is this like the COVID test thing? For sure I have COVID? Okay.
Exactly. So we had like an hour together to be like, oh my God. And we were excited, but I was just stunned. Like what is happening? I'm pregnant. I just remember that phrase just going over and over in my mind and just stunned. And so then I spent those 2 weeks taking care of this she was 15 months old at that point. And having this new, realization of that there's, a fetus growing inside me. And I felt, and just thinking, talking, like writing, what is this? Like, is this a sign? Is this like, just like, go for it. If your life is changing, why not? Like, if you're going to do one, why not do two? Which again, that is not a logical,
Yeah.
that's not a logical framework for a decision. But it is
not logical.
Kind of how I felt.
Well, and I mean, you sort of now have like, it's not just do I adopt this child or not, but there's like a whole bunch of questions. Like, were you looking at all the variations? Like, we say no to this child, but yes to this. We say like, or was it really like we do both or neither or none?
It was kind of like, I think maybe we're going to do both.
Yeah. 2 kids or no kids sort of thing.
2 kids or no kids.
Okay.
It was rough. I have a memory of just standing at my mother's kitchen sink, washing the dishes, and tears streaming down my face, just thinking I've been trapped. Like I've got caught in the trap.
Mm-hmm.
Motherhood is, I realize these are extreme things to say when one is a mother. Like, it's almost like, well, once you are a mother, you're not allowed to say those things anymore. You can say it if you don't have kids. But that's how I felt. Like, this is the system that has kept women small and busy for millennia, and, unable to do more. Mm-hmm. And I'm caught in the trap. Like, I succumbed. I'm here. I'm not like, and it felt like a closing of all the doors. I had dreams where, I remember one dream in particular, I was barred from my graduation. Like, you've chosen not to have like an intellectual or creative life. You've chosen a domestic life. Like, you can't even graduate now. Like, they kicked me out. And so it was really this, and I think this is due to my upbringing and the models that I had. It was a very either or. You're going to be a mother and do nothing else. Or in order to do those other things and be those other things that you really deeply want, you have to not have children. And so now we're getting to the conditioning, right? And those ingrained ideas where you think, in my case, it's either or, and I have to sacrifice one or the other. And then another piece of that also, the thing that finally tipped me over into, okay, maybe I can do this, was, again, from a book. I was reading a book. It was just one paragraph. It was, the book was Mother-Daughter Wisdom. And it was a paragraph about different kinds of mothers. I was like, different kinds of mothers? Like, there's the traditional mother, who really is fulfilled by, nurturing the lives of her children. Like, that is truly fulfilling. And that was what was so, I couldn't see myself in this role because I knew that wouldn't be enough to fulfill me. I knew I would need more. And so this book, in this paragraph she was just naming, there's a traditional mother who is fulfilled by that. And that's great. And then there's the non-traditional mother who loves her children, is a good mother, but needs other things in her life to be fulfilled and to find her purpose. And that's okay. And it was the that's okay part that really was impactful for me, because I realized I had a glimmer of understanding that perhaps the person I actually was could be a mother and be a good mother and do it without turning into a whole other person that I was not.
Yeah. So did you? I mean, we know you're a mother. You've set that much up.
Yeah, I did. I got 2 daughters. We adopted she was my biological niece, and our daughter was born. Their birthdays are 2 years apart, almost exactly. 2 years less a week. And she was born in. So this was 2009 was the big year in which I was grappling with the decision, and got pregnant and took on pretty quickly, took over as Maya's mother. She came and started living with us pretty quickly. So it was, even though I had been thinking about it for months, it was not, a 9-month gestation period.
Yeah.
It was pretty instant. And also being pregnant at the same time. So it was a lot.
Part of what can happen is when we're grappling with this kids or child-free decision, we really start going in circles. We get stuck thinking the same things over and over again, sort of being in our well-worn ways. And it can be really hard to take our thinking and our decision-making in a fresh direction, to actually get new insight and to feel like we're making steps forward towards a path, whatever that may be. If you want to break out of that rut that you are in and to get some insight from someone who is not your partner or not your mom, not your best friend, somebody who can really be impartial in this decision and can ask you thoughtful questions and who can make observations about what they're hearing and what you're seeing as far as where you're stuck and what it is you want, you definitely want to check out my Clarity Booster offering. This is the most accessible way of working with me one-on-one. What it is we meet for a 1-hour coaching call where we're going to tackle a specific aspect of your kids or child-free decision, where you're feeling stuck. I'm going to ask you a bunch of thoughtful questions. And after that coaching session, I'm going to give you some specific takeaways and exercises for you to do on your own after our call. Then a couple weeks later, we're going to meet up for a 30-minute follow-up call where we're going to see what kind of traction you've made, where you're at, and where we go from there. If you're interested in checking out the Clarity Booster offering, it's only $349 plus taxes. So it really is the most affordable way of working with me one-on-one, of getting my eyes and ears on whatever it is you're grappling with. I'm going to include the details for the Clarity Booster in the show notes of today's episode, and you can also find those over at kidsorchildfree.com. Again, that's the Clarity Booster. I look forward to hopefully hosting you soon for one of these calls. Back to the show. You remind me a little bit of myself because there's a lot of laughter and playfulness in telling this story. And I always have this kind of big grin as I talk about, and then this crazy thing happened to me. And oh my God, I went through this really traumatic experience. Of course, you're many years now, or quite a few years on the other side of this. And I can tell the intensity of this period of time is still very present for you. And it is. There's certainly echoes of it in your writing. And in addition to linking to your novel, The Mother Act, I'd love to share that piece that you also wrote that, fleshes out this experience of this ambivalence you felt and the uncertainty, and kind of puts us in that period of time of making this decision, because I thought it was, really beautiful and gets even deeper or in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great.
I mean, I want to both ask about your partner and his feelings, like coming into relationship with you. Had he been clear he wanted children? Did he feel similarly ambivalent? Was he like, whatever you want, honey? What? And then how did that meet up with this decision? Was it a joint decision? Was it deferred to you? And if so, what kind of pressure did that create? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, first of all, my husband, he's older than I am, and he already had 2 kids who were in their early 20s at this point, I think. So he had already done it. But he really did feel, I think, a pretty deep desire to have a child with me. Mm-hmm. But it was not in a pressure way. So in the novel, this is one of the things that's different. In the novel, Sadie's husband is pretty strong in his desire to be a father. My husband was not like that. He was, and I know this was the case with you from having listened to you speak on the podcast too, that your husband felt that it needed to be your decision because, and this gets into a whole other topic that's so unfair, but it is true. Certainly physically, biologically, there is more pressure and responsibility on the female partner. Mm-hmm. And also, no matter how much you fight against it, it's real. There is still, and no matter how far we've come, there is still a lot of a societal expectation around the woman as the primary in a heterosexual couple, as the primary parent, or the one who the buck stops with, or the one who bears the greater portion of practical and emotional and mental labor.
Yeah.
And so he did feel similar to your partner, that the decision needed to come from me, and he would support me in whatever I decided. And the moment I said to him, I want to adopt, he just instantly was like, okay, let's do it. And then he was also pretty excited about the pregnancy too. But he put the ball in my court, which I don't actually remember feeling resentful about, or feeling that was an additional pressure. I would not have wanted him to be like, this is what we're doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I mean, you sort of teased this already, the question I want to ask, which is, I think as much as we can have these intentions of going into a co-parenting relationship with someone, again, in a heterosexual relationship, and saying, we're going to 50-50, we're both going to do the same, right? Especially, I had a conversation with a client yesterday, like a male client. We were talking about sort of, our modern feminist ideals that a lot of us, not enough, but many of us as couples try and uphold, and just how hard that becomes when we look at having children. Do you think having a balance, and if we call it, I know people like to strive for that 50-50 balance, is that even possible? And if it's not, what should we be aiming for, especially when we're coming together and making this decision, with a partner of the opposite sex?
Yeah, I do think it is, parenthood is one of the few things, maybe the only thing that really tips the scale. Like, if you can be super egalitarian partners, and then when you come into this experience, there's not really a way to make it equal from the woman carries the child. If you are going to breastfeed, that's on her. It's very all consuming. And, but I think certainly for me, there was also this piece where, again, my conditioning kicked in around thinking it had to be me. Like, I had to be I was the most important parent. Right?
Yeah.
Which is kind of insulting to my partner. And also, and we've since talked about this, and I think this is can be common with male partners in heterosexual relationships when there's a new baby, is that they can feel really sidelined, like pushed out, or feel like they're not, their abilities aren't valued, or and my husband did feel that a little bit, because I became very like mama bearish, and I wouldn't even have had to, because before our baby was born, we had this child who, she was already born. She was not breastfeeding.
I was going to ask about that, how it might have been different between your children for those reasons.
Yeah. But I think I felt that she'd already had so much disruption in her primary caregivers. And it felt really important to me to establish a bond with her, and not, and like we both did. We were both there a lot. But I didn't want to like be off working 40 hours a week plus, because I felt like she was already confused about, like, psychologically about who her attachments were. She was losing her attachments to some pretty important people, like the people who'd been her primary caregivers, like again, like a second loss. She didn't really know us very well because we lived farther away. And so it felt really important to me for those reasons to not be like, okay, I'm out of here for, a whole bunch of the time. And then once the new baby was born, I did kind of dive headfirst into an all-encompassing version of motherhood. And I had a really good pregnancy experience. I had a beautiful birth that felt very empowered, and she was really healthy and took to nursing really easily. Like there was very little to none of the kinds of real hardships and struggle that can happen physically in birth and postpartum. But I just, I wanted to give it my all, and I kind of took on some of those ideas that were ingrained about, like, the mother's the most important,
Yeah.
And I would like to have not done that. There's a line in the Mother Act after Sadie and her husband have the baby, and it's something about, like, the experience has sent them straight back to the 1950s. Like, she's been this really outspoken feminist figure, and now she's like a 1950s housewife, and kind of like she did it to herself, and she's aware she did it to herself, but she and that, I mean, that comes from my own experience. That's kind of how I felt. I do when the girls were maybe like 5 and 7. I was reading a book called Equally Shared Parenting, and I have this distinct memory. My dad came to visit, and he saw the book, and he laughed. It was just this laugh, like, oh my God, it's the most ridiculous notion. And I felt so, like, deflated. Like, my utopian dream is just like, that's not even possible. What are you even thinking? And all of that said, now, and I would say since our girls became teenagers or even younger, like, we are pretty equal. In fact, at the moment, the balance is even tipped more toward my husband does more of, I mean, the care needs are much different and smaller, but like cooking, laundry, carpooling, like he does more of that stuff at the moment than I do. He's quite proud of the fact that our girls will come to him and be like, so the shirt that I asked you to wash, like, is it ready? And they won't come to me about laundry. They'll come to him. So I think we kind of are there now, but it wasn't the case in the early years. I think it is something to have clear conversations about. It might not feel like necessary beforehand, maybe, or it might feel, I don't know. I think that would be my advice, would be to be aware that these things are real, and there's this whole other component as well of, like, the emotional and mental labor and all the things you just have to keep track of and carry, and that having upfront conversations can be helpful.
I agree. And I think, although I think too much pre-planning, sometimes we can't plan for certain outcomes, right? We don't really know how things are going to be. I also would encourage people not to, like, speak in vague terms. Things like, I'm going to help. Of course, it's going to be 50-50, these sort of things, because what does that really mean? And so being a little more granular with your partner to talk about, specific ways you'll share roles and what expectations are and how you plan or hope to show up as parents and how you plan or expect one another to show up, I think can be helpful in telling and at least get the ball rolling, hopefully, in terms of who you might be entering into this decision with. So,
yeah.
As somebody listening who was previously on the fence and had a lot of ambivalence and a lot of the worries and fears that you articulate, if I'm listening right now, and I know my listeners are there, I'm hearing things like, I have been trapped. What have I done? To circle back to the beginning where you had, this real identity with your character, Sadie, and not having acted it out, but this feeling of like, oh my God, I've kind of ruined everything. What happened next? Because we need, I'm not saying you need to tie this up with a pretty bow, but how long did that feeling last, and how did you contend with that? And was that all the time? Were things awful? Was it what you expected or thought it would be, or was it different? Like, just tell us a little bit about the experience in those early years.
Yes, I am aware that I sound pretty negative, but
Everybody's
I think,
like, child free, not kids.
Yeah,
No, we're not doing
exactly.
the kids thing.
Yeah, exactly. So she didn't become a mother, right? Yeah. No, I think it's important to me to talk about that because it felt like I couldn't have those feelings and like it was almost like not okay to have them if you then go on to become a mother. And then once you become a mother, it's got to be all sunshine and rainbows and best job in the world and the, most important, like beautiful decision you ever made. And that once I was a mother, that is when I really felt the importance of speaking truthfully about my experience because it was hard and because it wasn't only hard, it was also beautiful. And I did feel huge love and really embraced aspects of it. I also, not everybody would be thrown into it as suddenly as I was, with two. And like if it had just been a single child, I think my experience would have been quite different. And that's probably what it is for most people. Although if you have twins, I imagine it is similarly overwhelming. But once I became a mother and it wasn't just magically amazing, and there were struggles, I felt that I owed it to myself and to other women who may also be struggling because it's very isolating to feel something and to feel that you're not allowed to say it because it makes you quote unquote bad. And, I remember there was an acquaintance, a friend of my mom's saying, how's motherhood? Oh, you just love it. Like she just rushed to answer the question for me. And feeling so silenced and invalidated in that moment because it wasn't that I didn't love it, but oh, you just love it did not come close to encapsulating the complexity and nuance of this experience that was the single most upending identity, like a changing experience of my life. Like, and so I just wanted nuance. I just wanted space for the complexity. And I just felt that these one note depictions of motherhood or the expectation that we declare it the best thing that's ever happened to us, or like that phrase, that's the best job in the world. That really annoyed me. It's like, it's not a job, it's a relationship. And it takes up a lot of my time, but it's not my job. And I was always trying to, still stay connected to my writing. And it did get easier as they got older, as we went along. And there were certain things, like I had so many fears, like I was afraid I would never read a book again, let alone write one. And I hadn't at that point managed to successfully finish a novel that I thought I could try to bring to market, and so that felt like something that to me, like my life would not be complete. That's what my life would be incomplete without. Like that's what felt like I would have failed at my life purpose if I didn't manage to complete and launch a book. And so I was actively, working on that in the midst of everything. And that was really important for maintaining my sense of connection to myself. But some of the first, that piece that you referenced in Literary Mama about the decision and how it all came together, that was something that I wrote and published, and it's all about motherhood, and I wouldn't have written it or published it if I hadn't become a mother. And so I was aware of, okay, my biggest fear was that I wouldn't read or write again, and look at, here I am reading it, writing, and actually publishing about this very experience. And then my first novel ended up being actually also about this experience. It's not the first novel I've written, but it is the first that I've, that's been brought to publication. So that, it wouldn't exist without this. And I also, our daughters are teenagers now, and they are just like full, complex, incredible, wickedly smart human beings who I am in relationship with. And I still think I am a non-traditional mother in terms of, I've never been the person who's, main focus of my life is, taking somebody around to hockey practices and whatever, and being, my house is little. I don't clean maybe as much as one should clean, and just actually my husband does a lot of that kind of thing. He and so it's not, but I have a relationship with these people who are incredible, and I did have a conversation with them before, sort of a year before the Mother Act was published, as I was starting to have conversations with my marketing team about what I was willing to talk about and not willing to talk about, and in publicity for the book. And so, I said to them, can you understand that it could be true that I could say I really struggled as a young mother when you were little, and I fantasized about leaving it behind and going back to the life that I had had as a, untethered person. Can you understand that could be true? And also that it can be true that I love you and I'm so glad you are here in the world and here in my life. And I think it blew their minds a little bit. Like, I think that, not in terms of because they couldn't understand it, but in terms of that I would say it, that I would be honest about that. And I think that they respected that nuance, because, going back to this thing of our models and how we sort of understand what's possible for us because of the models we're given, like, they are young women who are potentially going to be facing this choice for themselves and in the future. And I think that it's actually valuable for them to have
absolutely
to have a mother who is not just black and white about it all, who can go into that nuance. And so that's been an interesting component as well for my first book to be something that is kind of wrapped up in their lives and in my, even though it absolutely is fiction, it's not, but some of it is emotionally autobiographical. Certainly some of the things that Sadie says and writes, some of the more audacious things that she said, like, most of those are pulled from my private notebooks in those early years, or things that I thought and felt that I could not say, things I silenced in myself. And so I created a character who did not silence herself.
I love it.
Yeah.
I think it's incredible having that creative vehicle for yourself and to be able to speak to and with other women and people around this decision. And I'm interested to hear, like, what has the reception been like, both to your book as well as other messages that you've shared, whether it's personally or professionally, around these complex feelings, the difficulties of motherhood, ambivalence? Has it been generally positive? Has it been mixed? Have you received hatred? Like, what has it been?
It has been almost entirely positive. I've received messages from people on all aspects of the spectrum, people who are consciously, deliberately child-free and really feel their own concerns and desires reflected, and really appreciate that it doesn't. There was one reviewer who said something about that most books she had found about motherhood even if they grapple with the questions and the issues, they come down on like, well, motherhood is hard, but absolutely worth it. And like kind of wrap it in a neat bow, which I resisted doing. I just really, what I wanted to do was complicate the conversation in a way that was relatable and visceral, and you lived that experience with the characters. So I've heard that. I've also heard from mothers who say, oh my God, I've like never felt that I could say such and such. And it's in the pages of this book. I feel reflected. I feel seen. That is so meaningful to me. And also I've heard from a lot of men. I did not expect it would be a book that men read, and it absolutely has been. And that's really wonderful. I did do an interview with it was a father-daughter interview team, and the father was from an older generation, and he really had a problem with Sadie, like just kind of pushed me to declare her to be the villain and not redeemable, or like, is she redeemable? And I just, my project was to not judge her. My project was to show her, and maybe even like, the goal I set for myself, which I think is a pretty big challenge, was to have the reader arrive at that point, because it's not a spoiler that right at the beginning that she does leave her daughter. But you read the whole book, it isn't toward the very end when you finally see the scene where that happens. And I wanted the reader to arrive at that point and be so inside her character and her struggles that they would feel like she's doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Or even like, oh my God, I could see myself in those shoes. I could go there. Like this taboo thing. I wanted them to cross the line of that taboo. And I mean, I think that is what is so beautiful about fiction. I'm not advocating this in real life. I don't think that this is, a positive thing that I recommend, like abandon your children. That's not my where I'm going with this. But what I think is really valuable is this imaginative exploration around why would someone get to that point? And, what are the lack of supports and the like strength of the expectation and the messaging that would drive someone, like if she's in this experience and finding it to be not what she was sold, right? That she would do take such a drastic action.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned the one reviewer said, it was nice that it wasn't sort of tied up nicely with the motherhood is hard but worth it. Is motherhood hard but worth it?
Yes, I think so, but I do not think that's across the board. I don't think that's universal. I don't think that means it's for everyone. I mean, I think obvious is kind of like duh, but it needs to be a choice that each person gets to make for themselves. And society is still really skewed in the direction of wanting people to parent.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't think that's good for children either,
No.
It's so yeah.
Yeah, it's true what you say. And I think it's something that's even overlooked too often in the conversations that I have and the way I talk to my clients about this. Of course, it's self-focused because there is no child as of yet. And we want to make sure we feel good and well prepared to have a child or children. But, on a broad level, I really feel like this work is about ensuring that the children who are brought into this world are truly wanted, desired. And anyone who's ever felt otherwise will affirm that is just of ultimate importance. And of course, a lot of that comes down to making sure that is aligned with what a person wants. And that's not to say it can't be hard. Of course, many things in life are hard. And I appreciate, and there's a few conversations I'll be having on this podcast. We can say it is hard and it's difficult and it's trying. And I wanted to leave. But it doesn't mean that there aren't also wonderful aspects of motherhood and parenthood. And so
absolutely,
maybe you can finish this sentence. Motherhood is hard and?
Motherhood is hard. And if I did not have these people in my life, I would be so much smaller and poorer for it.
Beautiful. Is there anything we missed that you want to make sure we discuss before we wrap things up? I know we didn't touch on everything, but.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll just say, because I know that I've explored a lot around the ambivalence and the sort of almost the right to feel less than ecstatic about the thing that as women, you're meant to feel ecstatic about. And I think that, and also I have children and I am a mother. And I think the reason that I and Sadie, actually, my character, come strong on that is in part because I felt that I didn't have those voices when I was making that choice. All the voices were saying, "Oh, do it. You won't regret it. You will instantly feel magical love." And so it's like pushback against the culture and kind of taking a stand for there gets to be nuance in this. And I think, that's important, and we do a disservice to all of us. Absolutely. If we don't allow for that nuance. And that's so much of the work that you're doing, which is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when you're stuck, there's a lot of envy for this sort of black and white thinking, because it feels like it would be helpful in just making a decision, but it is a nuanced thing. And I just more and more believe there are no definitive right and wrong answers for most of us. It's about, I don't even want to say making the best of the path we choose. Yeah. Mine's making the best. Mine's just being in the worst of it. And I think speaking out about it and sharing it in the way that you have done and continue to do is so important. So I thank you for that.
Thanks so much, Keltie. This is really fun.
All right. Well, before we wrap up, I'm not going to ask you all of our rapid fire questions, but maybe you can just leave our listeners with a small piece of advice that if someone was stuck on the fence about whether or not to have kids, how might they explore that or consider that? What would you tell them?
I think give yourself permission to state what is actually true for you. Like if you are feeling something and it feels transgressive, sometimes we don't want to acknowledge that, or we're like, can't hear this voice inside my head. Like if you can get that out in the open, even if it's just to yourself, like write it down or speak it out loud and acknowledge it, then you're starting from a place of what is instead of what you feel should be or what you wish was. I think that's what I would say is we don't help ourselves by refusing to know what we know, or to at least have a starting point of the reality, even if it's a less than, desirable or good or whatever reality.
Yeah.
So a permission to feel what you feel and be where you are. It's okay.
It is some of the best advice I've heard given in answer to that question. I can't agree more. So thank you. Okay. Tell us, where can people find you? How can they purchase the book and follow your work?
Yes. So the book is called The Mother Act. It is sold wherever books are sold. It's published by Penguin Random House, so it's pretty widely distributed online, of course. But if you have an indie bookstore, you can support them.
Please try to, yes.
Yeah. And then I have a website, HeidiReimer.com. I have a Substack newsletter where I write some about motherhood stuff, but also creativity and the path to kind of becoming our truest selves. So that's on Substack, but you can find it through my newsletter as well.
All right. We will link to all those places in the show notes so people can easily find you. And thank you so much for such a wonderful conversation today.
Thanks so much, Keltie. It's great.
That concludes another episode of the Kids or Childfree podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's conversation. Now, if you have not already done so, first of all, I want you to give us a follow over on Instagram. Our handle is @KidsOrChildFree. Otherwise, I will link to that in the show notes. And what I would love for you to do is to slide on into my DMs and let me know, who would you like to hear on the podcast as an upcoming guest? This can either be someone in particular that you would love for me to have a conversation with, or maybe it's a certain type of guest. There's somebody in particular that you are wanting to hear from, whether that be, hey, Keltie, I want to hear from somebody who had kids later in life, or I want to hear from somebody who specializes in childhood trauma, or whatever it may be. Let me know who you want to hear from, who would be an ideal guest, and I will do my very best to get them onto the podcast for a future episode.